R. Chandrashekhar, President of NASSCOM, the industry body, joining in right now. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate you joining in. Good morning, Prashant this side. First up, if you can comment about the executive order which the US President Donald Trump signed overnight. It has got provisions relating to H-1B visa, moving away from a lottery system. What do you make of it? It's an order right now. It doesn't exactly say what to do about it. So I guess the legislation has to go about fixing the rules. How do you see it, though?
See, first of all, this order, I think, has been in the offing for some time now. Leaked versions of this order came out almost immediately after President Trump took office. If you look at the order that has now been actually signed by the President, there are two parts to it. The first part of the order talks about greater verification and scrutiny of applications of visas, and the greater oversight over the usage of these visas and the compliance with various provisions of the visas that have been issued. So in other words, this is about the whole enforcement of the existing provisions and dispensations. Per se, as far as the industry is concerned, that is not a major cause for any concern, because the industry has been compliant with US law and remains compliant with US law and will remain so in future also. As long as this oversight and inquiry is not too invasive or too disruptive, therefore that's not an issue. It may add a little bit to the compliance costs. It could add to some delays in the visa issuance process, all of which do make it a little more difficult to operate, but which are not fundamentally showstoppers or which have a huge substantive impact. At the same time, we do hope that all of these processes would be streamlined so that the ease of doing business is not adversely impacted. But the second part of the order, I think, can have much greater impact and implications for the industry, which is the review and the recommendations.
Okay.
In what way? Could you explain, sir? You're saying the first one,
yes,
not too much, but the second one is much more meaningful. Yes, go on.
The second part of the executive order calls upon the US agencies concerned, like the Department of Homeland Security, which controls immigration, like the Department of Labor, and like the Attorney General and his setup, to review the existing regime and make recommendations for the changes that need to be brought in, to ensure that people who come in under H-1B visas are more high-skilled. Now, whether this should be done by focusing on the wages or the particular occupation, because remember, H-1B is not only about IT. So whether it should be on the wages, level of wages, or the occupation, or the definition of particular skills, or moving away from the lottery system, these are all in terms of how that high skill would actually be defined. It's not as simple as it sounds, because in a fast changing technology environment, the definition of skilled and skills itself changes very quickly, and it's quite difficult for governments to follow that at a micro level. So in reviewing the existing arrangements, I think the underlying purpose and intent has been stated by the President, which is to protect American workers. We have per se no problem with that objective, but we have, as we have been pointing out in the past, none of these measures will actually protect American workers, including many of the bills which are on the anvil, unless they are applicable to all companies, because the Indian companies, which are in fact the only ones covered by many of the legislations contemplated as well as existing, account for only 20% of the visas, and therefore any such regulatory changes which are applicable only to 20% of the visa users will not actually protect the American workers.
Right. So just to take that point forward, this is about the H-1B visas. So very briefly, the executive order calls for agencies to come up with plans, devise ways to protect the American worker, essentially, right? So this could go into kind of, as we've discussed before, putting in a minimum wage level, etc., etc. Do you think it'll go that way? And do you think it'll be picked up aggressively by the Congress, which will make the laws with regards to this?
Yes. So, if you look at the changes or at least the elements of changes which will be brought in by the various organizations which are going into this, while it is both difficult and premature to anticipate what recommendations they would make, the elements which would be covered are perhaps more predictable, whether it is the wage level or whether it is the definition of skills or the lottery system, etc. If you or even the number of visas that are issued. And if you look at all of these areas, then some of them can be dealt with by the administration, for example, the lottery system, and some of them would have to be dealt with through the legislative route. As far as actions that need to be taken by the administration are concerned, perhaps they can be brought in more quickly depending on what the exact actions contemplated are. But most of the major issues, including the number of visas or the various definitions surrounding the visas or the different categories of companies, are all rooted in the law. And therefore, much of this will ultimately have to come through the legal lawmaking route. And in the lawmaking, I think it's important for us to understand that the H-1B visas is a very, very small part of the overall immigration debate in the US. It's the tail, it's not the dog. And therefore, many other factors and political ramifications will come into play with regard to illegal immigrants, unskilled workers, undocumented people, and so on. And that has had a checkered path in the past, and it is going to be certainly probably a longer route. So we will have to first see what the recommendations of the review are, and then which of them fall into the legislative bucket and which of them fall into the administrative bucket.
Okay, fair enough. Sir, TCS has described FY18 as possibly being directionally positive at this point. With these headwinds that we are talking about from the visa and the immigration front as well, your sense, would you concur? Would it be directionally positive?
I would certainly agree with that broader sentiment. I mean, I can't speak on behalf of TCS or Infi or any other company. We speak for the industry as a whole at an aggregate level, and that includes Indian companies, multinational companies, global in-house centers, etc. So looking at the industry in India as a whole, I certainly would echo that sentiment for the industry as a whole. And that is because, while visas are important, they are not the be-all and end-all for the industry, and it's not the one issue alone which drives the entire industry. There are business fundamentals, as I said. American companies need the services in order to go digital. They need the services in order to be able to adopt technology. And without, going digital and adopting technology, they would not be competitive, and they would actually not only not create jobs, even the existing jobs would be at risk. So therefore, I think it's important that all of these are recognized as we go forward.
Mr. Chandra, two largest IT services companies have reported numbers now, Infosys and TCS. Both for financial year 17 have reported a constant currency revenue growth of 8.3%. I'm talking about your guidance, NASSCOM guidance. Will it be around that level? I mean, one can't possibly imagine how it could be, way higher than that 8% odd figure. Go on, sir.
In February, we had indicated that we were not giving the guidance at that time, which was the normal practice, because of the very high uncertainties on different aspects. You would remember that that was just a few days after the Trump administration had come in.
Yes.
And there were major uncertainties about how the global economy would react, how different sectors would be affected, how international relations would get impacted, how currencies would move, how interest rates would move. So there were just too many variables which no one had any idea, because he was a very unknown commodity, in the sense that his political leanings and affiliations were not known. So we said that we will come out with it in the later part of the quarter, of the first quarter, which is in the month of May, June, and we believe that we would certainly be able to come up with it at that time. What we are seeing is, while I don't think I can be drawn into making an advanced prediction of our prediction, but I think that it would be fair to say that while all of these issues regarding political and visa related matters have witnessed a fair amount of turbulence, the actual impact in terms of the economy and technology, and economic and technological and business trends, has not been as dramatic. In fact, if you look at the Gartner estimates of the projected growth rate for the next year, it's around 4.6% or so. And therefore, the kind of percentages that the companies are reporting is clearly way above that, in fact almost double that rate, which shows that the India story is alive and well, contrary to a lot of the dire predictions which many people are making, and a little dramatically, I would say. But the fundamentals have not changed. The demand is healthy, and the basic drivers in terms of availability of skills here, shortage of skills there, more higher end work being done here, and the GICs and MNC story also growing rapidly alongside the Indian companies. All of this makes us pretty confident that the India IT story is certainly quite healthy and quite sound.
All right, so we're going